Joe Biden has said a lot of things are threats to American democracy. Could be the Russians. It could be any number of the different problematic things that his administration has talked about, including white supremacy and insurrection. And I think climate change is on that list. The list goes on and on and on. Now there's a new one, and it is, I guess, the biggest one yet. So it's about voting, because we know that's a big problem. It is being reported over by the dailymail.com that Biden is calling the GOP voting bills odious and vicious, which are, pretty nice adjectives there, are the most significant threat to democracy since the Civil War, which is a big deal because I thought that the insurrection was, and white supremacy was, and domestic violent extremism was. And then I think Kamala or somebody in the administration said climate change was. It's always the Russians are, like every month, they're a threat to American democracy. And so the list goes on and on. But this one, gun violence, of course, gun violence is another threat to American democracy. And now this is, right? This is the oppositional party. So this is sort of, a standard function of a democracy itself. You have different parties and you have different factions that organize themselves in order to pass things into law, right? You get this group organizes over here and they say, we want to do this with this piece of government money or government land, and they lobby for it and you fight it out and you put it in front of the people and they vote it and you say, great, we're going to annex that, whatever. It's just democracy. And so in this case, we just had an election in 2020 when, everybody on one particular side of the aisle was saying the most safe and secure and most reviewed election in history. And anybody who asks a question about it is a lunatic conspiracy theorist who is, a danger to democracy. So that happened. And now as a, kind of hindsight, as a country that says, well, we just went through something, there was a little bit of a disagreement about whether or not that was actually how you characterize it to be as perfect and without any flaws and all of that stuff. We think that maybe there is something to look at. And so we're just going to start investigating these things. We're going to run some audits here. We're going to pass some new legislation. We don't like what the courts did last go round. We don't like that they just sort of change things for, the legislature said this is the rule, and then the courts came in and they said, COVID, and they changed everything, and the legislature says, no, that's not how that works. Understand this. We are the legislature. The ability to control the elections has been delegated to us through the United States Constitution. Thank you very much. And so we're going to take that power back through the mechanisms of checks and balances. Remember this from civics class or social studies? We have 3 different branches of government, and they're supposed to punch back at each other. It's checks and balances. You want each branch independently kind of clawing at each other for their power. The executive branch is going to gobble theirs up, and the legislative branch wants to gobble theirs up. And just like James Madison taught us in Federalist 51, I think, this is very important. You want to pit ambition against ambition. And that's how you get a synthesis into something more beautiful. The federal government, the executive fights the legislative branch, which fights the judicial branch, and we all have checks and balances. Pretty simple concept. So we went back through this in 2020, and the country's looking back in hindsight and saying, well, we don't like what happened. The courts took this away from the legislature, or this Secretary of State, or this governor through this court. Or the whole system was screwy. And everybody was blaming it on COVID. So the legislatures now throughout the country are saying, no, that's not right. We're going to make some changes here. That's not going to be allowed to happen again because we don't like what happened in our local elections. And in my opinion, they're perfectly free to do that, right? This is how the system works. There's a pendulum that swings multiple directions, and it's going to go one direction and back the other. And so it went one direction in favor of, kind of loose, whatever goes. Just make changes willy-nilly in any of the election rules. Put the deadline back 3 days. Oh, you need 9 more days? Put it back 9 more days. Okay, no problem. Ballot collection, boxes everywhere, signature verification. Who needs that? It's COVID. Nobody cares. So it was like that. The pendulum swung that way, and now everybody is recognizing that was a problem. So the pendulum wants to swing back the other way, and people are saying, how about some voter integrity? How about we make sure that the people who are voting are who they say they are, so we can have some integrity in the elections. Now, when that happens, of course, you're going to see the party that benefited from the loosiness of the election rules going bananas, going ape bananas, because of the fact that a modified set of rules, the ones that they modified, benefited them. And if you modify it back the other way, well, this historic victory that they had maybe sort of evaporates right in front of their very eyes, because the only reason that happened was because the rules were changed. And now they're changing back. And so now something that would ordinarily be just a regular function of democracy, sort of, reviewing things, looking back and saying, we didn't do that so well, let's make some changes the next go round. That now is not just regular democracy. That is a threat to democracy. And in fact, it's something that is the biggest threat since the Civil War. In fact, this might be such a threat that it actually divides the country again. So that's our president now running around out there saying things like that. In a speech attacking the Supreme Court, Trump's, quote, big lie and the assault on the election. So Emily Godin posted this over at the Daily Mail. She said on Tuesday, he launched a counter-assault to attempts by Republican-controlled states to change voting rights laws, blasting the, quote, threat to democracy, vowing to protect free and fair elections. He says this is election subversion, the most dangerous threat to voting in the integrity of free and fair elections in our history. So you see how he does this, right? He says it's the most dangerous threat. He uses this language a lot. Dangerous threat, dangerous threat, dangerous threat in our history. But then he sort of, couches it with these modifiers to voting in the integrity of free and fair elections. So he gets very loose with this language. It's very kind of repetitive. You'd be thinking that we're only, 6 months in, that we wouldn't be in repeats already, but kind of running out of tools in the toolbox there. In a 25-minute speech that traced the history of the voting rights movement, Biden veered into attacks on Trump and Republicans he says are undermining confidence in America's election and defending his own administration's work on voting rights. So shortly after this, he posted, of course, on Twitter, he says, to protect our democracy and the sanctity of the vote, we must pass For the People Act, which I believe was H.R. 1. We talked a lot about that, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. He says it's a national imperative. So, there's a couple different ways to read this, right? They don't really have the votes to pass those things. And so what are they going to do? Is this another call to Manchin? Are they going to try to get Kyrsten Sinema to sort of break ranks and maybe pass some sort of voting rights, legislation? Who knows? Here's Joe Biden now actually out there. We just learned from the Daily Mail that he was giving us a little bit of a history lesson on what happened back during 2020. And if you recall, we talked a lot about that, right? Now, before I play this, I want to be very clear that the final verdict on who won the presidency in 2020 was Joe Biden. How do we know that? He's in the White House and everybody's calling him president. So it's pretty clear to me. I haven't seen any evidence to the contrary. So nothing that we're talking about here, of course, is trying to refute the claim or to offer an alternative perspective as to who actually won the presidency. It's pretty clear what happened there. But let's go back and just sort of revisit some of the litigation that took place, because Joe Biden's going to give us a characterization about what happened in the courts. If you recall, we covered a lot of it. Basically, every single case that came through here, we were talking about it. And we covered every case that went up to the Supreme Court. We were talking about all of them, right? And I talked about Sidney Powell saying, this is not so good. What are we talking about here? Some Venezuelan secret agent from like 30 years ago that nobody cares about, work with Hugo Chavez. That's not the Kraken. What is that? And but there were other very good claims, in my opinion. There were, basically usurpation of power. The different branches of government were taking the power away from the legislatures. They were changing the election rules at the last minute without any constitutional authority to do so. The courts just papered over the whole thing because it served one political party, and they were all unified to make sure that Trump would no longer be in power. So that is a big digression. Let's go and see what Joe Biden is talking about, though. He's going to tell us about what happened with the litigation. Here he is.
Election officials, the entire electoral system withstood unrelenting political attacks, physical threats, intimidation, and pressure.
Yeah.
They did so with unyielding courage and faith in our democracy. With recount after recount after recount, court case after court case, the 2020 election was the most scrutinized election ever in American history. Challenge after challenge brought to local, state, and election officials, state legislatures, state and federal courts, even to the United States Supreme Court not once but twice. More than 80 judges, including those appointed by my predecessor, heard the argument.
Nope, wrong.
In every case,
wrong.
Neither cause nor evidence was found to undermine the national achievement of administering the historic election in the face of such extraordinary challenges.
Nope. Sorry there, Joe. But no, actually, most of the evidence, I mean, I'm not most evidence never even made it into court. There was a couple cases where we heard a slight tiny bit of oral arguments, and those actually took place here in Arizona. But Arizona was sort of one of the contested states, certainly, but not one of the states that was really necessary that we were even really talking about. It was sort of a surprise. We spent a lot of time talking about Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and Georgia, where all of the election litigation was happening, and of course all those states flipped. So what Joe Biden is talking about is, yes, there were court cases that were filed. Yes, there were a lot of litigation cases that made it into court. If you go on the court docket, you'll see, yeah, there's a case number there. And you'll also see, oh, dismissed there. And so what Joe Biden and the Democrats do is they just turn around and say, well, see, it made it into court and it was dismissed. And yeah, a judge saw the case number come in and they saw something, in terms of a motion and a complaint filed against the Secretary of State or the governor or whomever was responsible for the underlying problem. And that is being used as evidence that there was some sort of evidence heard on the merits. In other words, the case was presented, Trump's people came in and they said, listen, here are our main claims. This is what we're saying happened. And the other side got to present their evidence. And then we sort of duked it out in the court of law. It never happened. We had very, very limited conversations about a tiny audit that took place in Arizona, and that's about the extent of what we covered. We had a number, I think 16 attorneys general sign on to a petition for certiorari in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. They threw it out. They didn't hear any of the evidence. They said you don't have standing. And this was a pattern that we saw elsewhere in Nevada, Wisconsin, Arizona, many other states. Lawsuits were being dismissed on standing, saying you don't even have a right to bring the claim. Why? It's because we're looking at you. We're not even going to consider what you're complaining about, but we're not going to hear your case. Why? A whole multitude of reasons that we're not going to reiterate here. We spent a lot of time talking about it. I said repeatedly that the courts were twisting themselves into pretzels to do anything possible to not rule on the merits. And, candidly, I thought that there was probably some pretty compelling reasons for them to do so as judges, right? They're almost in an impossible situation because what do you expect a judge to do? Come out and just invalidate an entire state's votes? Oh yeah, Pennsylvania just doesn't count anymore. What would that do to the country? No judge in their right mind was going to do that ever. So does that mean though that this was heard on the merits? Absolutely not. Very little evidence, if any, was really heard on the merits. And so Joe Biden comes out here and he keeps, repeating this stupid lie that no judge has found everything. Well, yeah, because no judge has really heard anything, including the Supreme Court with 16 state attorney generals. It's kind of the sole reason that they exist is to deal with these majorly constitutional problems. And these disputes, they were just asleep at the wheel. So Joe Biden's full of it there, right? Nobody heard anything. Everything was dismissed on standing and prematurely. The reason, though, I think this speech is coming out, I think they are freaked out in the Biden administration. They know that Arizona just wrapped up their audits. They know that they could be expecting a report coming out at the end of July or sometime near Labor Day. They know that different states are sort of percolating with the idea of their own audits and their own investigations. And I think that they're trying to get ahead of whatever is coming. I don't know what it is, but whatever is coming, they're coordinating a response and they're preempting this. Okay, there are a lot of different techniques, sort of called persuasion, right? Not persuasion, but persuasion. There's a book by Robert Cialdini that talks a lot about it. It's about something's coming. You're going into a sales meeting next week. And so that guy does this thing and you send him this before you go into the meeting so that he remembers you with 3 days. And then you sort of structure everything so that he's persuaded by the time you get to the meeting. He goes, oh yeah, I have this really good feeling about this guy. Never met before, but suddenly I'm going to give him all my business, right? That stuff happens in the real world. And it also happens politically. It also happens in marketing campaigns and all sorts of stuff. It's called persuasion. And so Joe Biden today, of course, is out there giving us a speech on voting bills and voting rights. And where the hell did this come from? Right? I thought we sort of were over that hill when we learned that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin were not going to be breaking the filibuster. That was kind of the end of that conversation. But Joe Biden now is out there full front and center. And as soon as we play this clip, we're going to go into the next clip where the Democrats out of Texas are kind of throwing this temper tantrum and getting up and just storming out of the state, going over to Washington, D.C., stomping their feet, very upset about voting rights. And you think, that's kind of weird. Are these two things coincidental? Is this part of an orchestrated little maneuver going on here that they're going to throw their temper tantrum? Joe Biden's going to get out here and he's going to start scolding everybody about voting rights. What is happening? Feels like they're setting the table. Like there's a little bit of a foundation that's being poured here because they know something is coming further down the pike. And let's take a look and see Joe Biden here. He's sort of wrapping this up. You're going to see, and he actually looks pretty good here in this speech. You know, they gave him something. He's got a little color in his skin and he's looking pretty good, but he's got some energy and you're going to see he's not happy about this. He's going to, for God's sake, man, you know, and all that type of language, you know, stand up and fight for something here. So they put a little extra sauce in the coffee this morning. Here is Joe Biden.
We're going to face another test in 2022, a new wave of unprecedented voter suppression and raw and sustained election subversion. We have to prepare now. As I've said time and again, no matter what, you can never stop the American people from voting. They will decide. And the power must always be with the people.
Okay.
That's why, just like we did in 2020, we have to prepare for 2022.
Yeah.
We'll engage in an all-out effort to educate voters about the changing laws, register them to vote, and then get the vote out.
Yeah.
We'll encourage people to run for office themselves at every level. We'll be asking my Republican friends in Congress and states and cities and counties to stand up for God's sake and help prevent this concerted effort to undermine our elections and the sacred right to vote. Have you no shame?
Whoa!
Whether it's stopping foreign interference in our elections or the spread of disinformation from within, we have to work together.
All right, so there it is, right? The foreign interference comes back in, and now the spread of disinformation. But I thought it was the GOP changing the voting rights. So it's also the foreign interference, and it's also the spread of disinformation, and it's also okay, got it. So, so that's Joe Biden out there, you know, doing his thing. Now, for God's sake, man, you know, stand up, do something, everybody. Joe Biden's angry. Now, the Democrats, as we mentioned at the start of the program, out of Texas, they just decided we're going to prevent voting bills from passing by not voting on the voting bills. And so we're just going to get up and leave. So they did that, actually. So there's a group of Texas Democrats that just kind of got on a plane and left Texas so that they couldn't be a part of the quorum. Of course, when you're in a legislature, you got to meet with your compatriots over there and then pass the bills. And so if you, in order to kind of get things moving, you got to have a quorum, meaning you got to have a full house in order to start the clock rolling and get some business done. And so they just said, well, we don't like what's on the agenda. We're not coming to the party. So they just got up and left. And we're going to look at it. This is from NBC News. Texas Democrats, they flee the state in an effort to block the GOP-backed voting restrictions, okay? Now, this article, of course, is over from NBC, so we're going to read this. It's kind of hysterical about how sort of one-sided it is. It's really funny. But it's really funny how they, you know, how they frame these things, okay? And we've talked about this a lot here, talking about sort of the two differences here between voter suppression and voter integrity. And the spectrum that exists here. And anybody who ever says anything like, well, you should have an ID to vote, or maybe you should vote in your precinct, or maybe we should check your signatures, or maybe we should sort of limit mail-in balloting and all of that stuff, and limit the drop box and limit the collections in those things. Why? So we have less of a chain of custody for every individual ballot, so that we can sort of make a one-to-one connection between ballot and the person who voted, and that gives us what's called voter integrity. That sounds like a very good thing. So we put that on one end of the spectrum. Well, that might sound good, but if you're a person that wants to, I would say, get more votes through that maybe serve your interests better, you'd want to water that down. And so you'd want to reframe that. You want to make sure that it's not called voter integrity, right? Because that sounds really good. Everybody wants voter integrity. So what do? You flip it around. You say, oh, those are voter restrictions. Or if you want to get really fancy, you call it voter suppression. Oh my gosh, you're suppressing voters? What kind of American are you? Are you a communist or something like that? That's insane. How could you possibly do that? Well, no, I'm just checking IDs. Oh, well, that doesn't sound bad at all. That sounds pretty reasonable, doesn't it? Sounds like voter integrity to me. So you can just sort of see as we go through this language how this all plays out. Now, voting restrictions is what they call it. Lawmakers left Texas and they arrived in Washington, where they're not elected, so they have no voting power there, to advocate for federal voting rights legislation. So they're risking arrest by leaving during the special session. Okay, and we're going to get there. It says, in an extraordinary effort to block Republicans, very extraordinary, from enacting new voting restrictions, otherwise known as voter integrity laws, Texas Democrats bolted again. They've done this before. A large group of Democratic members in the House of Representatives, they got to the airport after fleeing the state in a pair of charter jets. So when you're going to, look, if you're an elected official and you're going to do a big, dumb spectacle like this, you got to do it in style. Make sure you get chartered jets. At least 51 members were on the flight, a source familiar with the plans told the news. At least 7 others were en route as well. The unusual move, same thing they did in 2003, will paralyze the chamber. It's going to stop business until lawmakers return to town or the session ends, right? And so this is sort of part of the playbook that I guess exists there. Speaking to reporters at the airport on Monday, lawmakers urged Congress to quickly pass federal legislation. And that's weird, right? Because Joe Biden just gave a speech on voting rights, and we just heard that he's going to be telling us how important the For the People Act are and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act are. It's very weird that you've got this group of Texas Democratic lawmakers also landing in Capitol Hill at the same day. What a coincidence. Weird. To protect voting rights, they're going to stay in Washington, D.C. through August to run out the clock on the session, which began on Thursday. So you've got these Democrats who are going to D.C. for vacation for a few months so that they don't actually have to do their job out there in Texas. And this is going to be their new tactic for, I guess, preserving democracy by not participating in the agreed upon democratic functionality that exists. So it's wild to me, right? You've got the president who says the Republicans are trying to wreck American democracy by participating in American democracy, by saying, hey, we don't like what happened. We're going to pass some new legislation. We're going to introduce that in the House of Representatives in Texas. We would love to get the opposition side to come in and give us their perspective on this and vote on it, yes or no. Yay or nay. They can vote up or down. That's what happens in the House of Representatives. You don't get to just kind of sit on the sidelines, right, and stall stuff. So yes or no. Yes, sometimes you lose votes. That happens, right? Elections have consequences. Sometimes you lose. And so they would necessarily lose that vote. The Republicans would win. They would pass some voting laws, and democracy would continue on. In this case, though, that would be labeled as wrecking American democracy. That's exactly sort of how democracy is supposed to function, but that function would be wrecking it. What these Democratic lawmakers are doing, though, is sort of heroic, right? It's an extraordinary effort, and they're going to stay there to help preserve American democracy. They're going to stay there until August if they have to, just to protect America by sort of taking one of the wheels off of the democracy car, right? No, we're not going to, no, you don't, we're not going anywhere. If you don't go where we want to go, if you don't take this car where we tell you to take it, we're taking the tires off. How about that? And they just kind of get paraded by NBC News. So that's nice. Now let's take a look on board on their chartered planes. We can see here, we've got a group of, just outstanding people here, all on this chartered flight. Now, no masks or anything, which I think is just outstanding, which is just great. Fully endorse that. Love the idea. Hopefully they also agree with that. Jan C. Tim posted this at On Board Texas Democrats on their way to D.C., where they plan to stay for more than 3 weeks to deny the state a quorum. And we have James Tallarico over on Twitter, says, my Democratic colleagues and I are leaving the state to break quorum. We're going to kill the Texas voter suppression bill. Okay, voter suppression bill, right, which might just be very simple. I haven't looked at the bill, but probably just regular old voter integrity changes. Says, we're flying to D.C. We're going to demand Congress pass the For the People Act, H.R. 1, to save our democracy. These people are just so... There's something, my friends. Good trouble. So Texas Ledge. And so you see this group of people, looks like a third grade classroom or something, taking a picture. Third grade. I think that's Mrs. Johnson back there. So that's nice. And they also, gosh, Here you go. So this is the crew. This is the people we're looking at over here. So I think we got some purple hair back here. Is that purple hair? I'm not sure. I think it is purple. Looks about what you'd expect, right? From the Democrats. That is that mean? Is that a little mean? I can't be mean. I don't want to be mean. But of course, right here they are. Here's another group on another chartered flight, and it's basically what you'd expect. So. Once again, no masks for any of them there, which is just great. It's good news. Hopefully they are very, very in favor of that in other areas. Now, as we know, they left, and so the high school drama continues. So in Texas now, the Republicans who are still back in Congress doing their job, not on a field trip, they were in session today, and they passed a resolution that allows them to go and conduct an arrest. And so this was pretty interesting little clip I pulled off of Twitter. And so they vote like 72-6 or something like that. And what you're going to hear something happen, and they're going to turn this direction, and they're going to look up at the actual voting board. Let's listen in.
I move that the Sergeant at Arms or officers appointed by him send for all absentees who in attendance is not excused for the purpose of securing and maintaining their absence under warrant of arrest if necessary.
Members, you heard the motion, so turn over ballots. Question record vote. Clerk, ring the bell.
So they're voting now, right?
All members vote. There being 7.
All right, so it passed like 76 to something like that. So apparently there's an arrest order out for them now. Let's take a look and see what they're talking about. So this was written earlier before that took place, but here's some background on that. So they risk arrest by taking flight. Under the Texas Constitution, the legislature requires a quorum, 2/3 lawmakers to be present to conduct state business in either chamber. Absent lawmakers can be legally compelled to return to the Capitol, which is what they just voted on. The source said Democrats expect state Republicans to ask the Department of Public Safety to track them down. So these Democrats are in hiding now, basically, because there's now an official order from Texas to go grab them. Texas governor made tightening election rules a priority. He slammed the move as a dereliction of duty. He says their decision to break quorum abandons Texas. He says as they fly across the country on cushy private planes, they leave undone issues that can help their districts and our state. And I didn't see much about this in the media. I remember when Ted Cruz went to Cancun, which was in poor form, no question. It was basically like a level 5 hurricane just wiped through the country. And there were people hyperventilating about that for like weeks on end. I can't believe he did that. He went down to Texas. He went to Cancun. He left his constituents and all that stuff. And that was sort of not even official business, right? He just said, "No, we're just going to get the hell out of here," right? I'm rich. I got money. This is BS. I hate this cold weather. I live in Texas for a reason. We're going to Cancun. So, okay, not a good look if you're an elected senator from that state, just saying, "Hey, everybody, good luck. I'm out of here." But, I can't believe that happened. Oh my gosh, that's hysterical. Anyways, that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point that I am trying to make is that here, nobody cares. These Texas Democrats just picked up and just left. They just said, we're on official business. We're on official duty. We're supposed to be there voting on voting bills, and we're not going to vote on the voting bills. So we're going to go into hiding. We're going to pick up. We're going to go fly to D.C., and it's like a heroic thing happened. Ted Cruz went on vacation. It was the end of the world. These women are literally abandoning their duty. And I think women and a man are abandoning their duties and going on a field trip with their pals in D.C. and nobody even bats an eye. It's like the craziest thing. All right, so let's go back to the article. Republican House Speaker Dade Phelan vowed in a statement to use every available resource under the Texas Constitution and unanimously passed House rules to secure a quorum. The special session clock is ticking, he said. Many of the Democrats, listen to this paragraph, watch how they read this. Many of the Democrats who fled, they have families. Oh, they have medical issues too. Yeah, I believe that. Or they have childcare obligations, making the 3-week venture more difficult. which is, it seems very trying for them. Still, the members have nonetheless been considering the extraordinary move for weeks. To block the pending legislation, the Democratic lawmakers would have to remain away through the end of the special session, which can last as long as 30 days under the Constitution. Right, so very dramatic. Says, we are citizen lawmakers. We don't get professional salaries, said Fisher. We're businesses or we're someone else's employees. The 3-week trip would take on some. It's going to have a personal toll, they say. So a lot of problems, very stressed out, as I showed you previously, right? They're all just like melting. They're making a sacrifice for you, America, for democracy, for voting, because those GOP, racists, they're going to come out there and strip you of your ability to participate in American democracy. And so they have to just go out and save us all. Thankfully, they're doing that. And they're also, they look pretty stressed out, of course, on this selfie that they're taking. This guy looks a little uncomfortable, but, he probably should be. But they're having such a bad time that they actually needed to bring with them an 18-pack of Miller Lite. Oh, gosh, there it is right there. It's a case of beer, folks. Not even any good beer. Miller Lite's, it is. It's been a while since I've had any beer, but they're bringing their own 18-pack with them while they're saving America on their private chartered bus and on their private chartered jets to go land in Capitol Hill the same day that Joe Biden just happens to be giving a speech on voting rights in America. What a stinking joke. I mean, guys, if you're going to orchestrate this garbage, let's make it a little less obvious. Now, because they are in such dire straits, things are so hard for them, everything is so dramatic, they're actually, singing hymns now on the on the hill of the Capitol building. Here they are today, my friends. I just can't.
Standing there when a new Voting Rights Act for this century is there, and the rights that were struggled, that so many lives were taken, so much courage was demonstrated, are preserved once again. I turn it back over to you for the questions, and thank you very much for all that you and all of your colleagues are doing here today. Thank you.
We will overcome. We will overcome. We will overcome someday.
Yep, right in the Capitol building.
Deep in our heart,
I do believe we will overcome someday.
Thank you, Ms. T.
Oh, man, the Tone Deaf Democrats is a new name for them, man. That was pretty rough, but okay, well, they're excited and happy for themselves. Let's see what is coming in hot from the questions over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And by the way, everybody, if you're in the chat, I am using the form, so I'm not going to be looking for questions in the chat, but quick shout out to Want to Know. We've got Jeremy Matridas in the house. We've got Thunder 7 is here. We've got Speech Unleashed, and let's take a look at what is coming in from the questions. We got a ton. Oh no, we got that was picking up from yesterday. So let's see. First one here is from Want to Know. Says, breaking news, the Cuban regime is hunting down protesters and imprisoning them without trial. Just kidding. That's the Kamala Harris administration and the Trump supporters. Good to see you there. Want to Know. Let's see who else we've got. We have next up, we have John Delars here. Says, all the Democrats do is protest. Why is this news? They act like a bunch of junior high students, throw a tantrum, and get your way or raise money. It's a win-win from them. I'm so sick of these people. Yeah, it's sort of, it's kind of circular, right? It's always find a problem to complain about, always raise money off of that, never actually fix the problem, because if you do, then you run out of a grift. Then you can't ask for money to go solve the problem. And so it's just a cycle that continues on and on. Good to see you, John Delar. We've got Joshua Schwab is in the house, says that now that Hunter is a world-renowned painter, I wonder how long it will take him. So this is for the next segment. It says, I wonder how long it will take him to become a board member for any of the institutions that receive pandemic assistance payments, asking for a friend. So good to see you, Joshua. That was a Hunter question. We'll get there. We've got Thunder 7 says, what is going on? Is it legal for the Dems to not remain and do the job? So I don't know that it's legal. They just sort of issued essentially an arrest warrant for them. You said they ran to Washington and they're singing songs. They're not even hiding their tyranny anymore. Why? What can the Texas GOP do to drag them back? I feel like we're living in a nightmare. It's kind of a joke, isn't it? It sounds like they can just issue a warrant and go attempt to arrest them and see if that happens or not. We have Jay Heath 5150 says, the most significant threat since the Civil War? What a joke. The Democrats will do whatever they can to change the rules and maintain power. I'm so tired of the hypocrisy and the double standards from the left. A hamster running a wheel they can never get off of. Yeah, good to see you, Jay Heath. Good comment on that. It's everything is like the worst thing since something else, right? Remember, January 6th was the worst thing since Pearl Harbor. It was the worst thing in American history, the worst thing since 9/11, or even worse, many people are saying, than 9/11. We saw that from Steve Schmidt from the Lincoln Project, right? That this is what happened on January 6th is actually worse than 9/11 and all of the other wars that followed as a result of that. It's like actually insane, right? These people are not connected to reality. We have another one from Speech Unleashed says, if the Dems say something enough, somehow the media and the left take it as truth. No need to let the facts get in the way of the narrative they are trying to push. If you try to point out the truth, then your posts are deleted on social media, right? And we've seen a lot of that, a lot of censorship going on, no question. Good to see you. We've got Nadarb says, Steve Bannon says he believes in the next 10 days that Fan of Arizona will be submitting her report to the County Board of Supervisors with evidence of inaccuracies from the recent happenings in Arizona. Man, Steve Bannon, you know, I listened to him on Tim Pool, and the caricature that you hear of Steve Bannon, just generally speaking, I think is poorly attributed. Pretty intelligent guy and pretty articulate, and actually very insightful. I actually really enjoyed that episode. Want to Know says, a lot of reporting that 60,000 votes were duplicated in Georgia. Texas has 500 cases waiting in other states. So, yep, we're going to continue to see what happens with those. We've got Soul Viking is here, says pre-suasion and preparation for pre-subversion. Ooh, yeah, that's a nice comment there. Persuasion and preparation for pre-subversion. I like that. It's got good alliteration. I think that's the word. Let's see. We've got Speech Unleashed says, I think that if any taxpayer paid representative walks out on a vote or meeting, that they should have their pay docked for the day. If any of us call off work, we would get docked pay. So the same thing should happen to them. Sounds pretty reasonable, Speech Unleashed. Do you think that that's going to be the case? I doubt it. All right, Hyper Patriot is here, says, it is unbelievable that they are being celebrated for not doing their job. In any other profession, you walk off, fly away from the job, you get fired. I strongly dislike how politicians live and work by different rules than the rest of us. It's a great point, Hyper Patriot. They just don't, I think, understand what it's like to live in the real world, candidly, right? And we hear this in the way that they speak. We see this even, right? Whenever a politician, hey, how much does a gas of milk, how much does a gallon of milk cost, right? Or a gallon of gas? And they don't know. They don't drive themselves. They don't do any of these things. They just pass rules for the rest of us, the little people, the peasants out there. And they just make broad blanket statements that are not really connected to reality, referencing AOC, saying that Peru should just turn off their coal power plants. Oh, just turn them off. Just turn them off. Or no, not Peru, Puerto Rico, right? Just turn off your power plants. It's that simple. They go, those are the only things that we use to get electricity. Dummy, do you have any idea how this works? It's not that simple. All right, let's see. Next up, we've got Kenny 1B says, can the governor keep the session going through the next election to force those fleeing from their duty to forfeit their reelection? It's a good question. So I don't know the specifics on it, right? It sounds like there's a special session that goes through August. At the end of that, I don't really know what happens next. Can they reform the body or table the bill for a next session or call another special session, right? There's all sorts of different ways this can work. I'm going to guess that this is not long-term, right? That they're not actually going to succeed in stopping this from passing, right? It's Texas. They've got the votes. It's a political spectacle. It's a political field day. It's a field trip for adults to go out there and make a big heyday about this, make a big spectacle about this, because they know that they can't do anything in Texas. They need the feds to do it. They say, oh, we don't want our local people to govern our local elections. Help us, federal government. Help us, Joe Biden, because they know that the federal legislation that would modify how states run their elections would benefit their party. It's obvious. Okay. We have Kenny 1B. Thank you for that question. Next up, Thunder 7 is here, says, Rob, I heard that many in SCOTUS were afraid of the angry, violent mobs to even look at the evidence. They have families. They were afraid of their loved ones would hurt or their homes burned down. So I understand that concept, Thunder 7. I think that there's probably some truth to that, right? But I think that, truthfully, the bigger problem with with judges in general, and in particular in the Supreme Court, is that they focus almost entirely on legacy, right? They focus on sort of how they're going to be viewed in the next 40 years, right? When I went to law school, we were reading cases from the first judges, like ever, right? In Marbury versus Madison, and many of the other cases early on in America's founding. And judges know that. And they want their decisions and their opinions to be looked upon favorably in the history books, in the law school books, right? It's this big vanity thing. It's a legacy concept. And so they don't want to be the judge that gets remembered as, approving segregation, for example. They want to be the judge that is for whatever looks like a very, golden decision. Progressive, at the forefront of progress, I would say. So they were more concerned about that. The Supreme Court didn't want to be the body that said that the election was really bad because that would undermine the legitimacy of the court. Good question. John Delaris here says the Democrats are laying groundwork. They are getting people in Texas riled up, building momentum to get out and vote, which is going to be coming up in 2022. And they're also laying the framework that when they get just blown out in 2022, which will happen, that they can start claiming all of the fraud stuff, which will be hysterical because they were just telling us that we were insurrectionists for talking about that. Erection frogs. Lawmakers are abandoning their children at the border, says the last villain. That's right. That's a great framing. I love that. Brilliant. That's right. They've got kids at home, and they've got medical issues, and they've got all of the other problems that they're dealing with. They're just abandoning their children. Wow. Shameful behavior. Let's see what else. We've got Pandas here. Pandas in the house says, how come voter ID is racist? Every county has voter ID in the EU. Well, Panda, this is because obviously you don't know, but Joe Biden and Kamala Harris told us that unfortunately black people don't know how to get IDs or use fax machines or Xeroxes. So it's like, it's really, it's not funny. I shouldn't be laughing about this. Joe Biden said that, poor minority people in rural areas, they just don't know how to even access the internet. So if you said, hey, you have to register to vote, or if you had to Xerox a copy of something, like go to a Kinko's or something like that, Kamala Harris says that rural people just can't get out there. They're too dumb and too poor. And Joe Biden said that they're minorities, probably, just too dumb to go out there. So, I don't believe that at all. I think that they're both racist jerks for saying things like that, but I certainly don't think so. I think that voter ID is pretty obvious, pretty reasonable. I think that most people, you ever see those man on the streets? There was a YouTube video of a man on the street who went around to a bunch of African American people in a city and said, hey, excuse me, just a quick question. Do you have an ID? And they look at him like, are you kind of a moron? What are you asking me that? Of course I have an ID, idiot. And all these people are just shocked that you would even ask him such a stupid question. And we have the president of the United States making similar statements, and the whole thing just gets glossed over. So I think that's why it's racist, because Joe Biden and Kamala said it is. Honestly, that's the answer. Okay. Jeremy Matrita here says, I really can't stand how the left makes up their own terms. On top of that, the Dems run and hide when they don't get their way. If they abandon their post, they are giving up their right to vote on issues. It's a good point. We'll see if that comes to play. And then we got two more. Miss Lucky is here, says, can another special session start if this one expires? So it's a good question, right? I don't know the intricacies of the parliamentarian rules there in Texas, but I'm going to guess that if there's enough willpower, this is going to get done one way or the other, right? This is probably just a temporary speed bump and basically futile, I would guess. Governor Abbott says he plans on calling a special session after session all the way to the 2020 election, so they'll be in D.C. for quite a long time. That's from Feisty Lady. So there we go. We got an answer to that question. Thank you, Feisty Lady, for that, which is great, right? So two people can play that game. All right, we'll see how that one goes. We have Drearier Spider is in the house, says, should the GOP focus on reminding Americans the Democrats were the one to give us the Jim Crow poll taxes and literacy tests? Also, Joe Biden eulogized Robert Byrd, who was in the KKK. That's right. He did. And I've been saying this for a long time, that Joe Biden is responsible, I would say, for more incarcerated people of color than anybody in American history. Kamala too. She's a close second. So nobody takes that into account either. And then lastly, let's see. Oh, this is excellent news. What a great way to end the segment. Excellent news coming over from Panda says, did you see that pandas are no longer endangered species? I did not know that, but that's excellent news. I did not know that. So that means they're getting their panda on going on, aren't they? Good for them. All right, great questions. All of those came from watchingthewatchers.locals.com, and we very much appreciate all the love and support over there. Would love to see you over there. Thank you very much. Thanks so much for watching. Before you head out, I want to just remind you that I am a criminal defense lawyer here in Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, we've got a long history of helping good people facing criminal charges to find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases and beyond that in their lives. Our phone number for a free case evaluation is 480-787-0394. You can also find us online at www.rrlawaz.com. We can help with any type of criminal charge in the state of Arizona. Things like DUI, drug offenses, misdemeanor offenses. And we can also help with clearing up old case records, like expunging cases or making sure that you can restore your rights so that you can vote again or possess a firearm again or apply for some other federal benefits. We can remove mugshots off the internet. Basically, anytime that you or somebody you know or love is in trouble with the law in the state of Arizona, we have an amazing team of people. We would just love the opportunity to help. And our phone number, of course, 480-787-0394. And if you don't need any legal services, that's a very good thing, but you may be interested in some informational offerings so that you are prepared if you do have to deal with the police. And of course, I want to invite you to head on over to gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. You'll notice here, I've got several different trainings that are available, including the law enforcement interaction training. This is the 1, 2, 3 rule for dealing with the police. It's one rule you need, 2 questions that the police can ask of you, and 3 responses if they ask you a problematic question. So that's available now. You can also get a load at my personal productivity system here called Existence Systems. Fun little course. And then we have here, if you're a lawyer or a legal professional, be sure to check out this program. We are meeting twice every month. Again, all of this over at gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. And if none of that sounds any good to you, well, just go ahead and give us a follow, because I'm working on some other products and some other offerings. And of course, if you have not already done so, I want to invite you one more time to head on over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. It's where you can support the show, and it's where we can connect. We've got monthly Zoom meetings and a lot of other goodies coming up. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for watching and for all of your love and support. I will see you on the next one.